One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Morning. This is One Step Ahead Radio, and welcome to yet another session on updates around the world related to ESG and sustainability. This week we have a number of very interesting topics that are happening around the world, shaping the narratives, but also shaping, I guess, realities of many people, and we will go through some of them. And of course, we will this week address the latest Nobel Prize in Economy, which addresses one of the topics that are relevant not only from sort of a just transition perspective, which is one of the areas where the world leaders have been debating about in terms of tackling climate change and transformation to more sustainable future, but it's also relevant from a perspective of understanding what has happened in the past, and also what are the areas that will have most likely impact on many economies going forward. But before we invite James to do that, I'll take you through some of the interesting developments across the world in terms of energy, and particularly in relation to nuclear energy. One of the things that is becoming quite obvious across the world, given the increased need of energy for data centers, is the fact that many companies around the world that are running these data centers are looking more thoroughly into renewable energy, but also lately much more into something that is related to nuclear energy. And Google is one of the companies, and of course Nvidia and many others are doing the same things. And it's posing a question across the industry if nuclear energy and small modular reactors, SMRs, are something that will be a future. And in a couple of conversations I had with the people that are involved in both, I think, development of renewable energy, but also especially in relation to data centers and our need for increased data capacity across the world, have basically told me that you see the nuclear energy, so excuse me, is the energy that could be used for powering the CCS technology, which is at this stage in the world quite commercially uncompetitive. And as you know, CCS technology is used as a carbon capture and storage for the oil and gas production to actually abate the emissions that are generated from this. So there is a clear sort of an interest, both from the governments and I think from the industry, to spur further development of nuclear energy and create availability of, I would say, cheap and quote-unquote safe energy access going forward, not only for the increasing need in these data centers, but also for the need that could be linked directly to CCS technology and our ability to curb carbon emissions. Now, with the development of interest in nuclear energy, you can clearly see across the world, especially I think in the data center sort of a segment, but also in other parts of the energy use segments, utilities and so on, that nuclear energy is becoming the source that will be more and more debated. And one of the things that is challenging is the fact that increased focus on nuclear energy and investment needs in nuclear energy will to a certain degree also divert, I would say, not only the interest, but also the willingness of investors to invest in renewable energy sources, both because the nuclear energy development will demand much more solid capital investments. As we know, it's quite expensive, although the new type of reactors is not as expensive as the old ones. And in the same time, it may pose a big threat to renewable energy development, especially across the world in rich nations. Because in poor nations, one of the things that is really interesting is that the renewable energy development in the global south in particular and in poor nation is getting its moment in the sun. For years, the build-out of solar and wind power in the developing world has lagged behind richer nations. Renewable high upfront capital cost, basically have held back these investments, even though many countries in the global south are sunny, energy hungry, and less burdened with the legacy of fossil fuel infrastructure. But renewables in many energy emerging markets are now achieving a liftoff. Basically, the solar and wind power, measured both by energy generated and the share of total electricity generation, is growing faster in the global south than in the global north, according to the new study by energy consultancy PMI. Over the past 5 years, renewable energy generation has grown at the compound annual rate of 23% in the global south versus 11% in the world's richest economies. The consultancy defines the global south as Africa, Latin America, South and Southeast Asia, and excludes China and the major fossil fuel exporters in Eurasia and the Middle East. 70% of energy demand in the global south comes from countries where the solar and wind share of electricity generation is higher than in the world's richest economy. These countries include Mexico, Brazil, and Morocco. These findings are very important because they compare rate of growth, not total generation capacity installed. This makes sense since many developing countries started their energy transition more recently and are therefore starting from a lower base. When you listen to this, it's also important to stress and make it clear that yes, the mix of renewable energy in a total energy development in the world is increasing, especially in the global south. However, with that said, what people also need to understand that our energy demand will increase much faster than the mix in of the renewable energy going forward. And despite these efforts that we are having across the world, giving the energy demand increase, the fossil fuel generation, including oil and gas, will still be a dominating source of energy across the world. This actually leaves you with a question if nuclear energy and development of nuclear energy going forward will indeed be very, very important. And when we talk about that, there is interesting sort of a angle to both how European medical schools are giving more training on diseases linked to climate crisis, but also before that, the interesting latest report came out yesterday on Journal of Science about the dire, I would say, situation for global forest fires. And these global forest fires are generating 60% more carbon emissions in last 20 years. Carbon dioxide emissions from forest fires have surged 60% globally since 2001, and more and bigger blazes tore through fast-warming regions outside the tropics, according to this new study. The research was published this Thursday, yesterday, in a Journal of Science. It shows that wildfires are getting worse, particularly in one climate-sensitive area, the northern boreal forest, which span from Russia to North America. Fire emissions have almost tripled from those forests during the last 20 years. And that is what is worrying the authors of this report. And I would definitely recommend you to find it, this study, and to read it, because it poses a lot of questions to, while we in the same time need to decrease the amount of emissions generated, create a good precondition for sustainable transition, at the same time, we will have to deal with the consequences that are happening right now across the world. And now, in terms of the increased emissions, forest fires, and then we have what I mentioned earlier, mosquito-borne diseases such as dengue and malaria will become a bigger part of curriculum for medical schools across Europe in the face of the climate crisis. It's a funny and quite tragical discussion that I had with one of the doctors, medical doctors in Sweden about this, because they are actually discussing and preparing to see how they will manage the influx of these kind of mosquitoes and diseases in the south of Sweden, as you probably know, country that is far up north in Europe. Future doctors will also have more training on how to recognize and treat heat stroke, and we will be expected to take the climate impact of treatments such as inhalers for asthma into account. Medical schools leaders said, announcing the formation of European network on climate health education will be needed in much bigger scale than before. Led by University in Glasgow, 25 medical schools from countries including UK, Belgium, and France will integrate lessons on climate into their education of more than 10,000 students. So adaptation, whether we like it or not, is actually happening, and it's starting in the sectors that you would expect to adapt very quickly, which is the medical one. Now, there's another sector, the sector of Nobel Prize, and as you probably have read about this, there is a Nobel Prize in Economy that has been recently awarded on a very interesting topic, has a very big link to sustainable transition, definitely the just transition, and it's related to price and economy on the effects or impact of colonialism on equality and ability of nations to develop their economies. James, you are there with us today, and we had a bit of a chat before this uh, session today, talking about this Nobel Prize in economy. And from your angle, what is the sort of a first stab, if you look at this, in relation to sustainable transition that we were just discussing?
Yeah, good morning, Sasha. No, it's very interesting. I mean, I'll just premise that I'm not I'm not an economist, so my take on this is is obviously my take on this. But the three men who were awarded the Nobel Prize studied the impact of inequality and the role of institutions in building economic prosperity, comparing and contrasting different colonial countries. So it's a very long-term view on economic outcomes, and what they look at in particular. I mean, their key fact is that the richest 20% of countries today are 30 times richer than the poorest 20%. So looking at why there's these
That's astonishing number.
30 times. I mean,
it's crazy. I mean, if you listen to it, it's just amazing.
And these hugely different outcomes in so many countries that were subject to colonialism, and they kind of compare into two big buckets of types of domination. There was ones that's extractive, have extractive institutions that are exploitative, and a lot of those countries then become much poorer in the long run, while as those that had more inclusive institutions and above all the rule of law, democracy and participation tend to be today much richer. So the underlying theme that comes out is or the question that's kind of raised about this choice of highlighting this. I mean, this study, the work they did is 20 years ago, is all about the connection between institutions, governance, democracy, and economic outcomes in the long term. In economic and global geopolitical context, where there's increased authoritarian governments around the world, and what that means for human rights and economic outcomes. I mean, that's the other thing that kind of comes up in all of this, is kind of the sort of framing of around human rights in the connection to economic context. I don't know if that was another thing that struck you as well about it.
Yes, it did. And if you think about the need that we have, and some of this was addressed, I mean, I talked about it earlier today about the global south and transition. I mean, you can have an energy transition, but if you still have societies that are dominated by totalitarian regimes, you will have another type of issue going forward. So, and that particularly is related to China in transition on sustainable energy, but also in the way how the government is trying to do these things. So it has this study is very interesting from that perspective too. And in your take, I mean, there was one comment that I also found very interesting, that most of the Nobel Prize winners this year are men, and most of them are actually not from the global south. They are from the global west, so to speak.
Yeah, the global north and global west. No, it's interesting that this issue is highlighted by the Nobel Prize system, which is dominated by wealthy nations, men. So there's been no women recognized in the science Nobels this year, and also geographical divergence. The three economics prizes to Darren Acemoglu is Turkish by birth. The other two are British, Simon Johnson and James A. Robinson, but they all studied and had most of their careers in American universities. And it's interesting that this kind of issue around democracy and participation and the connection between global economic systems is kind of driven by this strange nomination process of this very historical Swedish system, which privileges individuals. Within science is hugely collaborative today, and so the whole thing of saying just a few individuals have stood out within a global scientific and research community, it sort of makes you reflect a little bit about the messaging and the choices that are made around around highlighting specific individuals from specific countries or specific universities.
Thanks, James. Many thanks for your comments and insights on this very interesting topic. Before we round up the session on One Step Ahead Radio this week, another sort of a last type of information that could be interesting for people out there listening is, of course, there is a COP coming up, COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan. It's an oil country, as you probably know, one of the biggest producers of crude oil and gas in that region, and one of the big ones if you look at the sort of amount produced over the years in the world as well. And the signals coming out from different kinds of areas that will be participating, both finance, business, and politics, is that this COP is all about money. And it's all about money, how to finance and how to find funds to top up the investments, especially in the poorer countries, in order to help them to transform themselves and prepare themselves also for the consequences going forward. Direct link actually to one of the findings in the Nobel Prize Economy research that has been done. And also the last topic for our One Step Ahead radio this week. I will wish you a great weekend. Please tune in next Friday. You can find the sessions, previous sessions on lundqvist.com, it.com, and you can also send us if you have ideas, proposals. You can contact me directly on topics that you would like to get covered. With that, all the best. Have a nice weekend, and we'll talk again next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Goodbye.
Thanks.